interactive, dynamic process that produces a very thoughtful bunch of words that we call a bill, which then has to be debated and negotiated and compromised among a lot of lawmakers in the House, in the Senate, and then of course the governor has the opportunity to weigh in sometimes too. So the lawmaking process is it has its own integrity and it has its own influences, and you can say whatever you like about it, but it itself creates its own balance because of the necessity of the input and the access to that process that people have. Whether you have money, whether you don't have money, of course, if you're organized, you have a lot more access, which is one of the reasons why you have FlamPack and things like that. But one of the marked differences of this marijuana topic, as I observe it, is how the ballot measure is proceeding. So all of that stuff that I mentioned about lawmaking doesn't apply. All of the back and forth and the integrity and its natural balance and people having the ability to weigh in and really strip down some language into some specifics is lost in the ballot measure. One of the curious things that I observed is, like, why are we using, or why is the Constitution of Florida the vehicle for bringing essentially recreational marijuana to the populace? Why is that happening? Because I noticed that the ballot measure itself is very general, it's very vague. A physician gets to recommend, well, what kind of physician? A chiropractor? Optometrist? A dentist? Sure, because that's a physician. Those are physicians under Florida law. It was very interesting to me to observe that, in fact, the ballot measure is remarkably vague, and so it looks like what's happened is, from an outside perspective and understanding a little bit the way legislation works, that what's happened is the decision was made, let's circumvent the legislative process. Let's not go there because it's too inaccessible or it's too cumbersome or unpredictable or undesirable. We'll just come at it like this and we'll put it on the ballot, and essentially it becomes a populist movement. It becomes a very grassroots motivated movement, and it's completely taken out of the legislative process. And so you get a ballot measure that lacks the specificity that you would have to have, that you would see in the legislative process. What physician gets to recommend it? Ballot measure doesn't say. It doesn't address the age of the person that gets to use it. It doesn't address anything about enforcement. And of course, there's this great catch-all. It's couched in terms of medical use of marijuana. However, there's this catch-all that when a physician decides that the risks are outweighed by the benefits, just go ahead and recommend it. So I noticed that this particular vehicle, platform of the ballot measure, using a document that usually addresses just basic human rights, equal protection, due process, what have you, all of a sudden you skip down and now there's marijuana on it. And it's confusing as a policy interpreter and implementer and advisor. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see what the public does. But I can say that from a lawyer's perspective, the vehicle of legislation is one thing, and the ballot measure for what normally would go through the legislative process and be battled out and interpreted and have much greater detail, specificity, and thought, that's missing in this process. And that's very interesting to me, and it's very frightening to me, too. We have, for example, no way to enforce roadside whether somebody's impaired by pot. We don't have the ability to do it. You can, it stays in the tissues, I understand, you know better than me, for a long time, 30, 60, 90 days. But there's nothing roadside that would test. You can send it out to a mass spectrometer and you get the results in a couple days at great expense. But it's an odd thing to do, to put something into the public mainstream, to give it a green light, and yet have no ability to track it, monitor it or enforce inappropriate use. So from a public citizen's perspective, it's a frightening development.